Marcus Thompson's weathered hands froze mid-reach toward the trembling German shepherd. The dog's labored breathing rattled exactly like Emma's final gasps in the ICU 3 years ago. The December wind under Chicago's Lower Wacker Drive bridge carried the same metallic scent of blood and antiseptic that had filled the hospital room where he'd lost everything. The dog's horrific facial wound gaped open like a grotesque smile, flesh hanging in frozen strips across his muzzle. Fresh blood dotted the pristine snow in perfect crimson circles, each drop marking time like a countdown to death. Other homeless souls huddled deeper into their cardboard shelters, too terrified to approach what looked like a monster from nightmares. But Marcus saw something different in those pain-glazed brown eyes, the same desperate plea for help that Emma had given him when the machines started failing, the same look that still haunted his sleep. What this broken man did next would restore an entire city's faith in the impossible power of love. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Marcus Thompson could count every sunrise since the phone call that shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. Sarah had been laughing at something 16-year-old Emma said about her chemistry teacher when the drunk driver ran the red light on Michigan Avenue. One moment they were planning Emma's senior year, the next, Marcus was identifying bodies in Cook Memorial Hospital's sterile basement. The steel mill where Marcus had worked for 32 years closed 6 months after the funeral. Downsizing, they called it, though Marcus knew the real reason. He'd become unreliable, showing up late, leaving early, his mind trapped in that hospital room where his girls had died holding hands. The union pension barely covered Sarah's medical bills, and the wrongful death settlement disappeared into lawyer fees and the mortgage on a house that felt like a mausoleum. Now, at 58, Marcus called the concrete cavern beneath Lower Wacker Drive home. The bridge's massive support pillars created natural windbreaks, and the elevated roadway above provided shelter from Chicago's brutal winter storms. Steam rose from manholes like ghostly fingers, offering precious warmth to the dozen souls who'd claimed this forgotten corner of the city. They called it the underworld, a fitting name for people society had written off as already dead. Marcus kept Sarah's wedding ring on a chain around his neck and Emma's stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanuts, wrapped in a garbage bag inside his duffel. Sometimes, when the wind howled just right through the girders, he could almost hear Emma's laugh echoing off the concrete walls. Almost. The other residents of the underworld knew Marcus as the quiet one who shared his food but rarely spoke. They didn't know about his past life in suburban Oak Park, about the 3-bedroom house with the white picket fence and the vegetable garden Sarah tended every summer. They didn't know he'd once coached Emma's softball team, or that he'd built her a treehouse that probably still stood in their old backyard, waiting for a little girl who would never climb its wooden ladder again. Dr. Sarah Chen's veterinary clinic sat 6 blocks north of the bridge, its warm yellow lights visible from Marcus's cardboard shelter on clear nights. He'd watched her arrive each morning at 7 sharp, always carrying a travel mug and moving with the purposeful stride of someone who had places to be and lives to save. Through the windows he'd glimpsed the waiting room filled with families and their beloved pets, a world of love and responsibility that felt as distant as the moon. Winter in Chicago was unforgiving, but this December seemed especially cruel. The temperature hadn't climbed above 0 in 2 weeks, and the news kept warning about a polar vortex sweeping down from Canada. Marcus's arthritis, a souvenir from 3 decades of steel work, made every movement feel like grinding glass in his joints. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the wind carried something more than the usual sense of exhaust and decay. Tonight it carried the metallic tang of fresh blood. The sound reached Marcus first, a low, keening whimper that cut through the December wind like a rusty blade. He'd been arranging his makeshift bedroll when the cry drifted from the darkest corner of the bridge's underside, where the concrete met the frozen embankment. Most folks would have ignored it, written it off as another urban phantom in a city full of strange noises. But Marcus had learned to listen for sounds that didn't belong, sounds that spoke of suffering. He grabbed his flashlight, a dollar store special with a dying battery, and picked his way across the treacherous terrain of ice-slicked concrete and scattered debris. The beam flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows that made the familiar space feel foreign and menacing. As he rounded the massive support pillar, the light caught something that made his breath catch in his throat. A German shepherd lay crumpled against the concrete wall, its dark fur matted with blood and dirt. But it was the dog's face that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. A jagged wound ran from the left ear down across the muzzle, leaving the flesh hanging in frozen strips. The injury was fresh enough that steam still rose from the exposed tissue, creating an otherworldly effect in the sub-freezing air. One eye was swollen completely shut, while the other, a deep brown that reminded Marcus painfully of Emma's eyes, fixed on him with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, his words forming visible puffs in the frigid air. The dog tried to lift its head at the sound of his voice, but managed only a weak tremor before collapsing back against the wall. Blood had pooled beneath the animal, already beginning to freeze into a dark, crystalline puddle. Marcus's first instinct was to run. He'd seen enough death, enough suffering to last 10 lifetimes. The dog was clearly dying, and getting involved would only mean watching another innocent creature slip away while he stood helpless. But as he took a step backward, the animal made another sound, not quite a whimper, not quite a sigh, that stopped him cold. It was the same sound Emma had made in her final moments, when the machines were keeping her body alive, but her spirit was already drifting toward whatever came next. A sound of pure vulnerability, of a soul asking the universe for just a little more time, a little more love before the darkness claimed it. "Good boy," Marcus heard himself saying, the words emerging without conscious thought. They were the same words he'd whispered to Emma as she lay unconscious in the ICU, surrounded by tubes and monitors that beeped like electronic heartbeats. "It's okay, good boy." "I'm here now." The dog's visible eye focused on him with startling clarity, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had lived there for 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Slowly, carefully, he approached the wounded animal, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The cold had numbed his arthritic hands, but Marcus forced them to work as he shrugged off his coat, a threadbare winter jacket he'd found in a dumpster behind Macy's. It wasn't much, but it was warm from his body heat, and the dog needed it more than he did. Gently, speaking in the same soft tone he'd once used to comfort Emma during thunderstorms, Marcus draped the jacket over the animal's shivering form. "That's it, buddy. Let's get you warmed up." The dog didn't resist as Marcus tucked the jacket around its body, though every muscle remained tense with barely controlled fear. "What happened to you, huh?" "Who did this?" As if in response to his question, the dog's eyes darted toward the street above, where the distant rumble of late-night traffic mixed with the wail of sirens. Someone had hurt this beautiful creature deliberately. The wound was too precise, too cruel to be accidental. The thought made Marcus's hands clench into fists, anger flaring hot in his chest before settling into something colder and more determined. He reached into his backpack and pulled out his dinner, a stale sandwich from the day-old rack at the corner deli, purchased with coins he'd collected from downtown sidewalks. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Breaking off a small piece of the bread, Marcus held it out to the dog, his hand steady despite the tremor of cold and adrenaline. Come on, boy. You need to eat something. The dog's nose twitched at the smell of food, but fear kept him motionless. Marcus placed the bread just within reach and settled back on his heels, giving the animal space to make its own choice. Minutes passed like hours. The wind howled through the bridge supports, carrying the scent of snow and exhaust and something else, something that smelled like home cooking from the apartments above, like families gathered around warm tables while he and this broken creature huddled in the cold. Finally, with infinite care, the dog stretched his neck forward and took the bread. The dog, Marcus, had started thinking of him as Rex, though he had no idea why, took 3 more pieces of bread before his strength gave out entirely. Each bite was a small victory, a sign that the will to live still flickered somewhere beneath the trauma and pain. Marcus watched every labored swallow, remembering how he'd done the same thing with Emma during her final days, counting each sip of water as a triumph against the inevitable. By dawn, Rex's breathing had become more labored. The makeshift bandage Marcus had fashioned from his spare shirt was already soaked through with blood and a yellowish discharge that spoke of serious infection. The dog's nose felt hot against Marcus's palm when he checked for fever, and the single visible eye had grown glassy and unfocused. "We need help, boy," Marcus whispered, his voice rough from hours of talking to keep the animal calm. "Real help." The other residents of the underworld stirred as pale winter sunlight filtered through the bridge supports. Carlos, a Vietnam vet missing his left leg below the knee, was the first to approach their corner. He took one look at Rex and shook his head grimly. "Man, you can't save that thing. Look at it. It's half dead already." Carlos's voice carried the practical brutality of someone who'd seen too much death to waste energy on lost causes. "Put it out of its misery and move on." "He's not a thing," Marcus replied quietly, never taking his eyes off Rex. "His name is Rex." "His name is gonna be dead by noon," interjected Betty, a weathered woman in her 60s who'd been living rough longer than anyone could remember. She wrapped her torn blanket tighter around her shoulders and glared at Marcus with undisguised irritation. "And when that happens, you're gonna have a corpse rotting next to where we sleep." "Think about the rest of us for once." More voices joined the chorus of disapproval. Jimmy the drunk called Marcus an idiot for wasting food on a lost cause. Teenage runaway Zoe, who couldn't be more than 17 despite her hard-lived face, suggested they should call animal control and let the professionals handle it. Even Father Miguel, the defrocked priest who still carried a worn Bible in his coat pocket, gently suggested that perhaps it would be kinder to let the animal go peacefully. But Marcus had stopped listening to their voices. All he could hear was the sound of Rex's breathing, growing shallower with each hour, and underneath it, the ghostly echo of Emma's voice from a sunny Saturday 3 years ago. "Daddy, can we keep him? Please. He's all alone and scared, just like the dogs at the shelter." "Mom says you can fix anything. Can't you fix his broken heart?" She'd been talking about a stray cat that had wandered into their backyard, orange and scrawny and covered in fleas. Marcus had wanted to shoo it away, worried about diseases and the mess it would make. But Emma had knelt in the grass, offering the cat pieces of her sandwich with such gentle patience that Marcus felt his resistance crumble. They'd ended up keeping Marmalade for 6 wonderful months before he disappeared one night, probably claimed by coyotes or traffic. Emma had cried for a week, and Marcus had driven through every neighborhood in Oak Park calling the cat's name until Sarah finally sat him down and explained that sometimes love meant accepting loss. Now, looking at Rex's labored breathing, Marcus made a decision that defied every practical consideration. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. His last $37, money he'd been saving for a pair of winter boots to replace the ones with holes that let in the snow. "I'm taking him to the vet," he announced to the small crowd that had gathered around them. The silence that followed was broken only by Rex's wheezing breaths and the distant hum of morning traffic. Then everyone started talking at once. "You've lost your goddamn mind," Carlos said. $37 won't even cover the exam fee," Betty added. "They'll laugh you out of there," Jimmy slurred, already working on his first bottle of the day. Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "My son, I understand the impulse to help, but perhaps we should consider—" "No." Marcus's voice cut through the chatter with surprising force. "I'm not considering anything except getting him help." He looked around at the faces surrounding him, people who'd become his unlikely family over the past 3 years, people who understood loss and desperation and the daily choice between survival and compassion. "I know how this looks," he continued, his voice softer now. "I know it seems crazy to spend my last money on a dying dog when I need boots and food and a dozen other things, but look at him." Marcus gestured toward Rex, who had somehow managed to lift his head at the sound of voices, that one brown eye still alert despite the fever burning through his body. "This dog didn't give up when someone tried to kill him. He crawled under this bridge, bleeding and broken, but he didn't give up. And if he's not giving up, then neither am I." The group fell silent again, and Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on their faces. These were people who understood the arithmetic of survival, who knew that every dollar spent on sentiment was a dollar not spent on necessities. But they were also people who'd been written off by society, dismissed as lost causes, forgotten by a world that had moved on without them. Zoe was the first to speak, her young voice carrying a weight that belonged to someone much older. "My mom used to say that sometimes you gotta choose between being smart and being human." She dug into her pocket and pulled out a wrinkled $5 bill. "I choose human." One by one, the others began reaching into their pockets, their sleeping bags, their hidden stashes. Carlos contributed $3 in quarters. Betty added a $10 bill she'd been saving for cigarettes. Even Jimmy, swaying slightly on his feet, pressed a handful of change into Marcus's palm. Father Miguel was the last to contribute, adding a $20 bill that probably represented his food money for the week. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "faith means acting without knowing the outcome." Marcus stared at the money in his hands. $78 total, more than he'd held at one time since losing his house. His throat felt tight, and for a moment he couldn't speak around the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you," he finally managed. "All of you." As he carefully lifted Rex into his arms, the dog's weight warm against his chest. Despite the fever, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. He felt hope. The walk to Dr. Sarah Chen's clinic would take 20 minutes in good weather. In the ice and snow, carrying a 40-pound dog, it would take much longer. But Marcus had carried heavier burdens before, and Rex deserved the chance that Emma never got, the chance to fight back against the darkness and win. The wind cut through Marcus's thin sweater like icy knives as he trudged through Chicago's snow-covered streets, Rex's fevered body pressed against his chest. Each step sent sharp pains through his arthritic knees, but he pushed forward, following the glow of Dr. Sarah Chen's clinic sign 6 blocks north of the bridge. The dog's breathing had grown more ragged during the walk, each exhale forming small clouds that dissipated quickly in the bitter cold. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at her clinic that morning to find a homeless man slumped against her front door, clutching what appeared to be a badly injured German shepherd. Her first instinct was to call security. Chicago's veterinary district had problems with people dumping sick animals on doorsteps, hoping someone else would deal with the expense and heartbreak. But something about the way the man held the dog, protective and gentle despite his obvious exhaustion, made her pause. "Sir? Are you all right?" Sarah approached carefully, her keys ready in her hand. The man looked up with red-rimmed eyes that held a combination of desperation and determination she recognized from her own mirror during the worst days of her divorce. "My dog needs help," Marcus said simply, his voice hoarse from the cold. "He's hurt bad, and I got money to pay." Sarah looked down at the German shepherd in his arms and felt her breath catch. The facial wound was horrific, a deep laceration that had clearly been inflicted deliberately, showing signs of serious infection. The dog's visible eye tracked her movement with surprising alertness, but she could see the fever burning beneath his fur, the way his body trembled with more than just cold. "How long has he been like this?" she asked, already reaching for her clinic keys. "Found him last night under the bridge. Someone did this to him on purpose." Marcus's voice carried a quiet rage that spoke of personal experience with cruelty. "Please, Doc. He's all I got." Sarah Chen had been a veterinarian for 18 years, long enough to recognize when an animal was beyond saving. The wound was severe, the infection advanced, and the dog showed signs of significant trauma beyond the physical injuries. Any sensible professional would recommend euthanasia. It would be kinder, cheaper, and more practical than attempting treatment that might fail anyway. But as she looked into the dog's brown eyes, Sarah saw something that reminded her of her own daughter Lucy's determination during her battle with childhood leukemia 5 years earlier. That same refusal to surrender, that spark of life that insisted on fighting even when the odds were impossible. "Bring him inside," she said, unlocking the clinic door. The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Sarah worked quickly to assess the damage while Marcus sat in the corner, his weathered hands clasped tightly together as he watched every move she made. The wound was even worse than it had appeared outside. Someone had used a knife or similar sharp instrument to deliberately slash the dog's face, missing vital arteries by millimeters. The infection had spread through the surrounding tissue, causing dangerous swelling that threatened to compromise his breathing. "What's his name?" Sarah asked as she prepared a sedative injection. "Rex," Marcus replied without hesitation. "His name is Rex." Sarah began the delicate process of cleaning and treating the wound. The dog, Rex, remained surprisingly calm throughout the procedure, as if he understood that these people were trying to help rather than harm him. She administered antibiotics, pain medication, and carefully sutured the deepest parts of the laceration. The work was intricate, requiring all of her skill to preserve function while minimizing scarring. As she worked, Marcus began to talk, quietly, steadily, as if the words had been building pressure inside him for years and were finally finding release. "I had a daughter once," he said, watching Sarah's careful movements. "Emma. She was 16 when she died. Same accident that took my wife, 3 years ago now." His voice remained steady, but Sarah could hear the weight of grief underlying every word. "Emma loved animals, always bringing home strays, trying to fix everything that was broken." Sarah glanced up from her work, surprised by the openness of this stranger's confession. Most of her clients shared stories about their pets, but there was something different about Marcus's voice, something that spoke of profound loss and unexpected healing. "She would have loved Rex," Marcus continued, "would have sat right here talking to him the whole time, telling him stories to keep him calm. She had this way with hurt things, like she could see right through to their souls and convince them they were worth saving." As if responding to the mention of Emma's name, Rex's tail moved slightly against the examination table, the first voluntary movement he'd made since arriving at the clinic. Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips as she continued her work. "The bill for this is going to be substantial," she warned gently. "The wound care, antibiotics, pain management. We're looking at several $100s minimum, and that's if there are no complications." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him doing calculations in his head. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of pet owners trying to balance love against financial reality. Too many times she'd watched people make impossible choices between their animal's health and their own survival. "I got $78, Marcus said finally. "It's all I have, but it's yours if you can help him." Sarah's hands stilled on her instruments. $78 wouldn't even cover the cost of the antibiotics, let alone the surgery and ongoing care Rex would need. She thought of her own struggling practice, the stack of overdue bills on her desk, the conversation she'd had with her landlord about potentially closing the clinic if business didn't improve. Then she looked at Rex, sedated but still fighting, and at Marcus, who had clearly given everything he had for a dog he'd known for less than 24 hours. "We'll figure out the payment later," she heard herself saying. "Right now, let's focus on getting Rex healthy." The transformation was remarkable. Over the following days, Marcus became a fixture at the clinic, arriving each morning when Sarah opened and staying until she locked up at night. He helped with cleaning, organizing supplies, and provided a calming presence for nervous animals. Rex responded to his care with an almost human-like devotion, his tail wagging weakly whenever Marcus entered the room. But it was during Rex's third night at the clinic that Sarah truly understood the depth of the bond forming between man and dog. She'd stayed late to check on a sick kitten and found Marcus sitting beside Rex's recovery kennel, singing softly in a voice that was rough but surprisingly melodious. "Hush now, baby, don't you cry," he sang, the same lullaby Sarah remembered her own mother singing decades earlier. "Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. Close your eyes and drift away. Dream of sunshine and better days." Rex's eyes were fixed on Marcus's face, his breathing steady and calm for the first time since the surgery. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she realized this homeless man was giving Rex something no amount of medical treatment could provide: the assurance that he was loved, that someone cared whether he lived or died. It was then that Vincent Hayes appeared. Sarah was updating Rex's chart the following morning when the clinic door chimed announcing a new visitor. She looked up to see a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s dressed in clean jeans and a leather jacket that spoke of middle-class respectability. His smile was confident, practiced, but something about his eyes made Sarah immediately uncomfortable. "Morning, Doc. Name's Vincent Hayes. I'm here about my dog." "I'm sorry, but we don't have any dogs scheduled for pickup today," Sarah replied, checking her appointment book. "Are you sure you have the right clinic?" Vincent's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I think there's been a misunderstanding. See, I heard through the grapevine that someone brought in a German Shepherd with facial injuries. Big dog, black and brown, probably acting aggressive and unpredictable." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm sorry, but I can't discuss specific patients without proper authorization. The thing is," Vincent continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, "that dog belongs to me. He's a trained security animal worth a lot of money, and he was stolen from my property 3 days ago. I've got the paperwork right here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out what appeared to be registration documents. From the back room came the sound of urgent barking, Rex's voice, raised in what sounded like pure terror. Sarah had never heard him make that sound before, not even during the most painful parts of his treatment. Marcus appeared in the doorway between the waiting room and the back area, his face pale but determined. "That man is lying," he said quietly. "Rex wasn't stolen. He was tortured." Vincent's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. "Listen here, old man. I don't know what story you've cooked up, but that animal is dangerous. He attacked me, which is why he's got those injuries. I was defending myself." "Defending yourself with a knife?" Marcus stepped fully into the room, and Sarah could see the controlled anger radiating from his thin frame. "Defending yourself against a dog that was chained up and couldn't fight back?" The tension in the room was palpable. Rex's barking had turned to a low, continuous whine that spoke of memories too terrible to bear. Sarah found herself caught between two men, each claiming ownership of the dog that had become the center of an unexpected battle for truth and justice. Vincent pulled out his cell phone. "I'm calling animal control. They'll sort this out real quick." But Marcus wasn't backing down. For the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, he had something worth fighting for, something that needed him as much as he needed it. "Go ahead and call," he said. "But when they get here, they're going to want to know how a security dog ended up with knife wounds that spell out the word bad across his face." Sarah looked at Vincent's registration papers more carefully and noticed something that made her blood run cold. The dog described in the documents was listed as aggressive and unpredictable, recommended for intensive behavior modification through firm discipline. In the back room, Rex had gone completely silent. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Vincent's face had gone rigid, his practiced smile evaporating completely as he stared at the homeless man who had just exposed his darkest secret. Sarah felt her hands trembling as she looked more closely at the registration papers, noticing details that had escaped her initial examination: inconsistent dates, a veterinary signature that looked suspiciously fresh, and most damning of all, a description of Rex's behavioral issues that read more like a torture manual than a medical assessment. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man," Vincent said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "That animal is dangerous. He attacked 3 people before I got him under control." Marcus stepped closer, and despite being outweighed by at least 50 pounds, he showed no sign of backing down. "The only dangerous thing in this room is you. Rex didn't attack anybody. You tortured him because you got some sick satisfaction out of breaking something beautiful." "Gentlemen, please," Sarah interjected, her veterinary training kicking in even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I think we need to involve the proper authorities here. Animal control can sort out the ownership question, and if there's been abuse, there's been abuse, all right." A new voice interrupted from the clinic's entrance. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a retired police officer turned animal behaviorist, stood in the doorway with a grim expression on his weathered face. Sarah had called him earlier to consult on Rex's case, particularly the psychological trauma that seemed to run deeper than his physical wounds. Dr. Rodriguez's presence seemed to drain all the color from Vincent's face. The two men knew each other. That much was obvious from the way Vincent's confident posture crumbled into something resembling panic. "Hello, Vincent," Dr. Rodriguez said calmly, stepping into the clinic and closing the door behind him. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Mike, thank God you're here," Vincent said, his voice suddenly desperate. "This vagrant stole my dog and filled these people's heads with lies. You know how valuable Rex is, how much training went into—" "I know exactly what went into Rex's training." Dr. Rodriguez cut him off, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I also know why you were fired from the Canine Academy, Vincent. Care to share that story with Dr. Chen and Mr. Thompson here?" The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of Rex's anxious panting from the back area. Sarah could see Vincent calculating his options, his eyes darting between the exit and the 3 people who now stood between him and the dog he claimed to own. "Doctor." Rodriguez turned to address Sarah and Marcus, his expression softening slightly. "Vincent Hayes was dismissed from the Chicago Police Canine Training Academy 18 months ago for using excessive disciplinary measures on the animals in his care. 3 dogs had to be euthanized because of injuries they sustained during his training sessions." Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. "What kind of injuries?" "Knife wounds, primarily to the face and neck." Vincent believed that pain was the most effective motivator for obedience. Dr. Rodriguez's voice remained clinical, but Sarah could hear the disgust underlying his professional tone. Rex was his final victim before we caught on to what he was doing. Vincent's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the rage that had been simmering beneath his fake charm. You people don't understand anything about animal psychology. Dogs are pack animals. They need to know who's in charge. Sometimes that requires firm correction. Firm correction? Marcus's voice rose, all pretense of calm abandoning him. You carved the word bad into his face with a knife. What kind of sick? I was trying to save him, Vincent exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. Rex was weak, disobedient, useless as a working dog. He failed every test, couldn't follow the simplest commands. My father would have put him down months ago, but I saw potential. I was trying to make him strong. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt sick as she realized the depth of Vincent's delusion. He genuinely believed his torture had been justified, even beneficial. She thought of Rex cowering in the back room, probably listening to every word, and felt a surge of protective anger that surprised her with its intensity. Dr. Rodriguez stepped closer to Vincent, his hand resting casually on his phone. Your father's methods died with him, Vincent. What you did to these animals wasn't training, it was sadism. My father built the best security dogs in the Midwest, Vincent snarled, all pretense of civility finally abandoned. He knew that weakness had to be burned out of them, that respect came through fear. These bleeding hearts don't understand that sometimes you have to break something completely before you can rebuild it properly. Marcus felt a white-hot rage building in his chest, the same fury he'd felt 3 years ago when the drunk driver walked away from court with a suspended sentence and community service. Rex wasn't broken when you got him. You broke him, just like your father broke you. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. His face contorted with rage as he took a step toward Marcus, his hands clenching into fists. You don't know anything about my father or me. That dog was worthless before I got my hands on him. He was Officer Rodriguez's partner, Doc. Rodriguez interrupted quietly, his words stopping Vincent mid-sentence. Rex was the dog assigned to my son Michael before he was killed in the line of duty 2 years ago. The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Sarah felt her knees go weak as she realized the full scope of the tragedy. Rex hadn't just been any police dog, but the beloved partner of a fallen officer, subjected to torture by a man who should have been helping him heal from his own trauma. Marcus stared at Dr. Rodriguez, pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place. Your son, Officer Rodriguez, he was the cop who died in that school shooting on the South Side. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Rex was with him when it happened. He tried to protect Michael, but the shooter was already in the building. Rex blamed himself. Dogs do that, you know. They think they failed when bad things happen to their handlers. Vincent's bravado was crumbling rapidly as he realized how badly he'd underestimated the situation. Look, maybe I was a little rough with the dog, but he needed discipline. He was traumatized, unreliable. He was grieving, Dr. Rodriguez said simply. Rex spent 6 months after Michael's death refusing to work with anyone else. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't play, barely responded to commands. The department was going to retire him, maybe find him a home with a civilian family where he could heal. That's when you volunteered to rehabilitate him. Sarah felt pieces of her own heart breaking as she imagined Rex's journey from beloved police dog to tortured victim. She thought of her own struggles with depression after her divorce, how kindness and patience had slowly brought her back to herself, and realized that Vincent had taken a grieving animal and turned his natural healing process into a nightmare. I was trying to help him, Vincent insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. Dogs need structure, need to know their place. Dogs need love, Marcus said quietly, his anger transforming into something deeper and more profound. They need to know they're safe, that someone cares about them. That's what heals trauma, not more pain. From the back room came a sound that made everyone freeze, Rex's distinctive bark followed by the clicking of claws on linoleum. Despite his injuries and the sedatives in his system, the German Shepherd had somehow gotten out of his recovery kennel and was making his way toward the front of the clinic. He appeared in the doorway between the two areas, moving slowly but with clear purpose. His bandaged face bore the evidence of Vincent's cruelty, but his brown eyes were alert and focused. He looked at each person in turn, Sarah, Dr. Rodriguez, Marcus, and then his gaze settled on Vincent. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. Rex's lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed teeth stained with his own blood, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. It wasn't the sound of an aggressive dog looking for a fight. It was the sound of a traumatized animal recognizing the source of his nightmares. Vincent took an involuntary step backward, his face going pale as he realized that all his training had accomplished was creating a dog that would forever associate him with pain and terror. But then something remarkable happened. Marcus knelt down and extended his hand toward Rex, his voice gentle and reassuring. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now. I won't let him hurt you anymore." Rex's attention shifted to Marcus, and the growling stopped. Slowly, carefully, the wounded dog approached the homeless man who had become his savior. When he reached Marcus's side, Rex pressed his injured face against the man's chest and whimpered, not with fear, but with relief. The message was unmistakable. Rex had made his choice about who he belonged with, and it wasn't the man who had tortured him in the name of training. Vincent's last shred of control finally snapped. "That dog is worth $5,000. You can't just give him to some homeless bum who can't even take care of himself." "You're right about one thing," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling out his phone and dialing a familiar number. "Rex is worth more than money can measure. Which is why I'm calling Animal Control to report a case of severe animal abuse, and then I'm calling the police to file charges for theft and torture of a retired police animal." As Dr. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his phone, describing Vincent's crimes to the authorities, Sarah watched Marcus' gentle hands stroke Rex's trembling form. She realized she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the rescue of an abused animal, but the mutual salvation of two broken souls who had found exactly what they needed in each other. Vincent made one last desperate attempt to assert his authority. "You people are making a huge mistake. That dog is dangerous, unpredictable. He'll turn on you the first chance he gets." "The only dangerous thing in this room," Marcus said, standing slowly with Rex pressed against his legs, "is a man who thinks love and fear are the same thing." 20 minutes later, Vincent Hayes was led away in handcuffs, charged with animal cruelty, theft of police property, and fraud. As the patrol car disappeared down the street, Marcus knelt beside Rex and buried his face in the dog's neck, both of them trembling with relief and exhaustion. For the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days, Marcus Thompson was no longer alone in the world. 3 days after Vincent's arrest, Marcus sat in the clinic's back room watching Rex sleep in his recovery kennel, the dog's breathing finally steady and peaceful. The bandages on Rex's face were clean and white, a stark contrast to the horror Marcus had first encountered under the bridge. Dr. Chen had said the healing was progressing better than expected, but Marcus could see something troubling in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. The bell above the clinic door chimed, and Marcus heard Sarah's voice greeting someone in professional tones that didn't quite mask an underlying tension. He'd learned to read her moods over the past week, the way she bit her lower lip when worried, how her hands moved more quickly when she was anxious. Something was wrong. "Mr. Thompson?" Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face carefully composed but pale. "Could you come to the front, please?" "There's someone here who needs to speak with you." Marcus felt his stomach clench with familiar dread. In his experience, Official visits never brought good news. He followed Sarah to the waiting room where a woman in a crisp business suit stood examining Rex's medical chart with the cold efficiency of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Mr. Thompson, this is Janet Morrison from Chicago Animal Control," Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. "She's here about Rex's legal status." Janet Morrison looked up from the chart, her expression professionally sympathetic but firm. "Mr. Thompson, I understand you've become attached to this animal, and I want you to know that everyone appreciates what you've done for him. However, there are legal complications we need to address." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly, the same sensation he'd experienced when the doctor first told him about Sarah and Emma's injuries. "What kind of complications?" "Rex is technically still classified as police property," Morrison explained, setting the chart aside. "Even though he was retired from active duty, he wasn't officially released to civilian ownership. Vincent Hayes had no legal right to take possession of him, which means his custody reverts to the Chicago Police Department." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. "But Vincent tortured him. The police were going to put him down." "That's not entirely accurate," Morrison interrupted gently. "The department was planning to retire him to a suitable home. There's actually a waiting list of qualified families who want to adopt retired police dogs." Sarah stepped forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Qualified families. Mr. Thompson saved Rex's life. He spent his last dollar on medical care and has been here every day nursing him back to health." "How is that not qualified?" Morrison's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson's living situation presents certain challenges. Retired police dogs require stable homes with adequate space, regular veterinary care, and owners who can provide for their ongoing needs." "You mean because I'm homeless?" Marcus said quietly, the words carrying no bitterness, only weary acceptance. "Because I can't provide the kind of home you think Rex deserves. It's not personal, Mr. Thompson. It's policy. These animals represent significant investments in training and care. We have to ensure they're placed in environments where they can thrive." Marcus looked back toward the treatment area where Rex was sleeping, probably dreaming of running free instead of cowering in fear. The dog who had learned to trust again, who wagged his tail when Marcus sang Emma's lullaby, who had chosen love over fear despite everything Vincent had done to him. "What if I could provide those things?" Marcus asked suddenly, an idea forming in his mind. "What if Rex had a stable home and regular care?" Morrison shook her head with professional patience. "Mr. Thompson, I understand this is difficult, but the requirements are very specific. Prospective adopters must demonstrate financial stability, permanent housing, and what if he wasn't adopting alone?" Everyone turned to see Dr. Rodriguez entering the clinic, his weathered face set with determination. Behind him walked a younger man with the same strong jawline and kind eyes, too young to be Michael, but clearly family. "Dr. Rodriguez," Sarah said with relief. "I'm so glad you're here." "I came as soon as I heard about the custody issue," Rodriguez said, his attention focused on Janet Morrison. "Ms. Morrison, I believe we need to discuss Rex's placement more thoroughly." Morrison's professional composure faltered slightly. "Dr. Rodriguez, while I respect your expertise, the department's policy on retired canine placement is quite clear." "Then let me be equally clear," Rodriguez interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement. "Rex was my son's partner. My son died protecting civilians, and this dog spent months in psychological trauma as a result. When the department handed him over to Vincent Hayes for rehabilitation, they essentially sentenced him to torture." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of Rex stirring in his kennel, as if he could sense the tension in the air. Rodriguez continued, his voice growing stronger. Now, after months of abuse that would have broken a lesser animal, Rex has finally found someone who sees him as more than just police property or a failed investment. He's found someone who loves him. "With all due respect," Morrison said, but Rodriguez held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not finished. Mr. Thompson saved Rex's life, not just physically, but emotionally. That dog trusts him in a way he's never trusted anyone since Michael died. You want to take him away from that and put him with strangers who think of him as a prize they've won from a waiting list?" Marcus felt something loosening in his chest, a sensation he remembered from the day Emma had successfully ridden her bike without training wheels, pride mixed with hope, and the terrifying possibility that sometimes good things really did happen to people who needed them most. The younger man stepped forward, extending his hand to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I'm David Rodriguez, Michael's brother. I'm also a social worker with the city's Veterans Affairs Department." Marcus shook the offered hand, confused by this unexpected introduction. "I'm not a veteran, son." "Never served." "No, but you served this city in other ways. 32 years at the steel mill, paid your taxes, raised a family. You're exactly the kind of person my brother died protecting." David's voice was warm but determined. "More importantly, you're exactly the kind of person Rex needs." Morrison looked between the Rodriguez men with growing frustration. "Gentlemen, I appreciate the sentiment, but policy is policy. We can't make exceptions just because—" "Actually, we can," David interrupted, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "I've been reviewing Rex's case, and there's something everyone seems to have overlooked. Rex wasn't just retired from active duty, he was medically retired due to PTSD. That changes his legal classification significantly." Sarah leaned forward, suddenly interested. "How so?" "Animals retired for medical reasons can be classified as therapy or service animals in training," David explained. "If Mr. Thompson were to enter a veterans transitional housing program, which his age and employment history make him eligible for, Rex could be placed with him as part of a therapeutic intervention program." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that there's an apartment available in the Riverside Veterans Complex, and they have a specific program for residents with therapy animals. You'd have stable housing, job training opportunities, and Rex would have the ongoing care he needs while providing you with companionship and emotional support." Morrison's carefully maintained professional mask was beginning to crack. "This is highly irregular. The paperwork is already in progress," Dr. Rodriguez said with a slight smile. "I may be retired, but I still have friends in the department. Rex's medical retirement and transfer to therapeutic status was approved this morning." Marcus felt like he was drowning, but in the best possible way. After 3 years of believing he had nothing left to lose, suddenly he was being offered everything he thought was gone forever: a home, a purpose, and most importantly, a family. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." David Rodriguez smiled, and for a moment Marcus could see the echo of the young police officer who had died protecting strangers. "Because Rex chose you, Mr. Thompson. And if my brother's partner thinks you're worth trusting, that's good enough for me." From the back room came the sound of Rex's distinctive bark, not the terrified cry they'd heard when Vincent appeared, but the excited, happy sound of a dog who could sense that something wonderful was about to happen. Janet Morrison closed her folder with a sigh that mixed defeat with grudging admiration. "I'll need to file the proper reports, but it appears everything is in order, Mr. Thompson. Rex will remain in your custody pending the completion of his medical treatment." Marcus felt tears running down his cheeks, and for the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 18 days, they were tears of joy. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in the doorway of apartment 4B at the Riverside Veterans Complex, watching Rex explore their new home with cautious curiosity. The German Shepherd's bandages had been removed the previous day, revealing angry red scars that would fade with time but never completely disappear. The word "bad" was still faintly visible across his muzzle, a permanent reminder of Vincent's cruelty, but Dr. Chen had assured Marcus that Rex's vision and jaw function would return to normal. The apartment was small but clean, a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and windows that looked out over the Chicago River. It had been furnished by the Veterans Affairs Department with basic necessities: a bed, a small table and chairs, and most importantly, a comfortable dog bed that Rex had immediately claimed as his own. After 3 years of sleeping on cardboard under a bridge, it felt like a palace. Marcus had been trying to adjust to having walls and a roof, to the strange silence that came with being alone instead of surrounded by the dozen other souls who had shared the underworld. He missed Carlos's gruff commentary on the morning news, Betty's endless stories about her grandchildren she hadn't seen in 20 years, even Jimmy's drunken singing that echoed off the concrete pillars at all hours. But every time the loneliness threatened to overwhelm him, Rex would appear at his side, pressing his warm bulk against Marcus's legs as if to say, "You're not alone anymore." The transition hadn't been without challenges. Rex still flinched at sudden movements and refused to let anyone except Marcus touch his face. He had nightmares that left him whimpering in his sleep, and certain sounds, the scrape of metal on concrete, raised voices, even the innocent snap of a rubber band, would send him cowering behind Marcus's legs. But slowly, day by day, the trust between man and dog was rebuilding something that Vincent's torture had tried to destroy. Marcus was learning to navigate his own healing process as well. The Veterans Affairs counselor, a patient woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, met with him twice a week to help him process not just his recent homelessness, but the deeper grief that had driven him to the streets in the first place. It was Dr. Reeves who had suggested that caring for Rex might be therapeutic for both of them, two broken souls learning to trust the world again. On this particular morning, Marcus was expecting a visitor that both excited and terrified him. Sarah Chen had called the night before to ask if she could stop by during her lunch break. She'd been checking on Rex's progress since they'd moved into the apartment, but this visit felt different somehow, more personal. When the knock came at the door, Rex's ears perked up immediately. He'd learned to associate Sarah's voice with kindness and healing, and his tail began its tentative wagging, still cautious but genuine. Marcus opened the door to find Sarah standing in the hallway with a small bag in her hands and a nervous smile on her face. "I brought lunch," she said, holding up the bag. "I thought maybe we could eat together, see how Rex is settling in." Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with the terrifying possibility of connection. That's real nice of you, Dr. Chen. Come on in." "Sarah," she corrected gently as she entered the apartment. "When I'm not working, just Sarah." They sat at the small table, sharing sandwiches from a deli near the clinic while Rex dozed contentedly at Marcus's feet. The conversation started with safe topics: Rex's recovery, the weather, Marcus's progress in the VA's job training program, but gradually deepened into something more meaningful. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, setting down her sandwich and looking directly at Marcus. "Why did you really save Rex that night? I mean, I know you've said he reminded you of your daughter, but there was something else, wasn't there?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently stroking Rex's ears while he considered the question. No one had asked him to examine his motivations so directly, and he found himself thinking about that night under the bridge with new clarity. "I think," he said slowly, "I saw myself in him. Both of us had been broken by people who were supposed to protect us. Both of us had given up on the idea that anyone could love us enough to help us heal. He paused, looking down at Rex's peaceful face. Maybe I saved him because I hoped that if he could come back from that kind of hell, maybe I could too. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she realized the depth of Marcus's self-awareness. This man, whose society had written off as a lost cause, possessed an emotional intelligence that many of her wealthy clients lacked. "And have you come back from hell, I mean?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile Sarah had ever seen from him. "Ask me again in a few months. But for the first time in 3 years, I'm starting to think it might be possible." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway outside, raised voices, the sound of someone pounding on a door. Rex immediately went on alert, his body tensing as his ears swiveled toward the source of the disturbance. Marcus moved to the window and looked down at the parking lot, his blood running cold at what he saw. Vincent Hayes stood beside a black pickup truck, arguing with a security guard while pointing up at the apartment building. Even from 4 floors up, Marcus could see the rage radiating from the man's posture, the aggressive way he gestured as he spoke. Vincent had been released on bail pending trial, and apparently he'd decided that his legal troubles were somehow Marcus and Rex's fault. "Sarah, we need to call the police," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Vincent's here." Sarah immediately pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, the building's fire alarm began blaring. Through the window, Marcus could see smoke beginning to pour from the first-floor maintenance room. Vincent's argument with the security guard had been a distraction. He'd somehow gotten into the building and started a fire. "We have to get out of here," Sarah said, grabbing her purse. "The stairs will be our safest bet." But Rex had gone rigid with terror at the sound of the alarm, his body pressed against the floor as he panted in obvious panic. The combination of the piercing siren and the acrid smell of smoke had triggered something primal in the dog's traumatized psyche, and he refused to move despite Marcus's gentle encouragement. "Come on, boy, we have to go," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice calm, even as the smoke alarm's shrieking brought back memories of hospital monitors and emergency rooms. "It's okay, Rex. I won't leave you behind." But Rex was lost in his own private hell, probably reliving the moments when Vincent had tortured him while sirens wailed in the distance. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and despite Marcus's coaxing, he wouldn't budge from his position pressed against the wall. The smoke was getting thicker now, seeping under the door and making Sarah cough. "Marcus, we have to go now. The whole building could go up." Marcus looked at Rex, then at Sarah, then made the only choice his heart would allow. "You go. Get to safety, and call the fire department. Tell them there are people still inside." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah said firmly, moving to Rex's other side. "We'll carry him if we have to." But Rex was a 70-pound dog in full panic mode, and both Marcus and Sarah knew that trying to force him to move could result in injury to all 3 of them. The smoke was getting thicker, and somewhere below them, Marcus could hear the sound of breaking glass and Vincent's voice shouting obscenities at the security guards. It was then that Marcus remembered Emma's old trick for calming Rex during thunderstorms. He knelt beside the terrified dog and began to sing, his voice barely audible over the fire alarm but steady and soothing. "Hush now, baby. Don't you cry. Daddy's gonna sing you a lullaby." Rex's ears twitched at the familiar melody, the same song Marcus had sung during those long nights when the dog was recovering from his injuries. "Close your eyes and drift away. Dream of sunshine and better days." Slowly, incredibly, Rex began to relax. His breathing deepened, and his eyes focused on Marcus's face with the absolute trust of a creature who had learned that this human would never hurt him, never abandon him, never fail to keep him safe. "That's my good boy," Marcus whispered, gently attaching Rex's leash. "Let's go home. Let's go somewhere safe." This time, Rex stood up and followed, still trembling but trusting Marcus to lead him through the smoke and chaos to safety. The three of them made their way down the emergency stairs, passing firefighters who were already working to contain the blaze that Vincent had set in his desperate attempt at revenge. As they reached the safety of the parking lot, Marcus saw Vincent being led away in handcuffs for the second time in 3 weeks. This time, the charges would be much more serious: arson, attempted murder, violation of his bail conditions. Vincent's rage had finally consumed him completely, destroying any chance he might have had for redemption. But Marcus felt no satisfaction in watching his tormentor's downfall. Instead, he knelt beside Rex in the cold December air and held him close, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief. They had survived another test, another moment when everything could have been lost. Sarah knelt beside them, her hand resting gently on Rex's back. "You saved him again," she said softly. Marcus shook his head, burying his face in Rex's fur. "No, he saved me. He trusted me enough to follow me through his worst fear. That's not something you save, that's something you earn." As the fire trucks and ambulances began to clear away and the apartment building was declared safe for re-entry, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted. Vincent was gone for good this time, his threats silenced by his own destructive choices. Rex had faced his trauma and chosen love over fear. Now, Marcus had remembered what it felt like to be needed, to be trusted, to be part of something larger than his own grief. For the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 19 days, Marcus Thompson felt like he was truly alive. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the warm spring sunshine outside Chicago's Grant Park Community Center, watching Rex demonstrate his newfound skills to a group of amazed children. The German Shepherd, who had once cowered at every sound, now sat calmly as 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez, Officer Michael Rodriguez's nephew, carefully brushed the scars on his face while explaining to the other kids how battle wounds make heroes even braver. The transformation had been remarkable. After Vincent's final arrest and conviction on charges of arson and attempted murder, Rex had slowly begun to shed the layers of trauma that had defined his existence. Dr. Patricia Reeves had been right about the therapeutic value of their partnership. Healing Rex had given Marcus a purpose that extended far beyond his own recovery, while Rex's gradual return to confidence had shown Marcus that redemption was possible for any broken soul willing to do the work. Today marked the official launch of the Second Chances program, a joint initiative between the Chicago Police Department, Veterans Affairs, and the local animal rescue community. Marcus and Rex were the pilot team, visiting schools, hospitals, and community centers to demonstrate how love and patience could overcome even the most severe trauma. The program paired rescued animals with veterans and homeless individuals, creating families while providing therapeutic support for people society had forgotten. Sarah Chen stood nearby, clipboard in hand, as she coordinated the day's activities. She had closed her struggling private practice 3 months earlier, not out of financial necessity as she'd once feared, but to accept a position as the program's lead veterinarian. The success story of Marcus and Rex had brought unexpected donations and grants, allowing her to expand her mission from treating individual animals to healing entire communities. "Dr. Chen," called Maria Santos, a local news reporter who had been following their story since the apartment fire. "Can you tell us about the expansion plans for Second Chances?" Sarah smiled, glancing at Marcus as he knelt beside Rex to help a shy little girl named Isabella overcome her fear of dogs. "We've received approval to expand the program statewide. By the end of the year, we hope to have 50 teams like Marcus and Rex working in schools, nursing homes, and community centers across Illinois. The reporter turned her attention to Dr. Rodriguez, who had become the program's administrative director while maintaining his role as a grief counselor for families of fallen officers. Dr. Rodriguez, what would your son think about how his partner's story has evolved? The older man's eyes misted as he watched Rex gently accept a flower crown that the children had made for him. Michael always said that Rex had the biggest heart of any dog he'd ever worked with. I think he'd be proud to know that Hart is still healing people, just in a different way than he originally trained for. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The apartment at Riverside Veterans Complex had become a real home, filled with photos of Rex's visits to schools and hospitals, letters from children he'd comforted, and certificates recognizing their community service. But more than the external recognition, Marcus treasured the internal transformation he'd undergone. The grief over Sarah and Emma's deaths hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it had evolved from a consuming darkness into something more manageable, a bittersweet memory that coexisted with new purpose and unexpected joy. Dr. Reeves had helped him understand that healing didn't mean forgetting, but rather learning to carry loss without being crushed by it. Mr. Marcus, Isabella called out, her initial shyness forgotten as she ran toward him with a hand-drawn picture. I made this for Rex. Marcus knelt down to her level, accepting the drawing with the solemnity it deserved. The artwork showed a stick-figure man and a large dog standing under a rainbow, with Hero written in purple crayon across the top. This is beautiful, sweetheart. Rex is going to love it. Rex seemed to understand the significance of the gift, gently nuzzling Isabella's hand as she giggled with delight. It was moments like these that reminded Marcus why their work mattered, not just for the people they helped, but for Rex himself, who had found a way to transform his trauma into a gift for others. As the event began to wind down, Sarah approached Marcus with a thoughtful expression. Over the past 6 months, their professional relationship had gradually deepened into something more personal. They had dinner together twice a week, took long walks with Rex along the lakefront, and shared stories about their past lives and future dreams. Neither had rushed to define what was growing between them, content to let it develop naturally. There's something I want to show you, Sarah said, pulling an envelope from her clipboard. This came in today's mail. Marcus opened the envelope carefully, unfolding a letter written on official letterhead from the Illinois governor's office. As he read, his eyes widened with disbelief. Dear Mr. Thompson, the letter began, it is my honor to inform you that you have been selected to receive the Governor's Award for Outstanding Community Service, in recognition of your extraordinary dedication to healing trauma through the human-animal bond. The ceremony will be held at the state capitol next month, and you are invited to bring Rex as your guest of honor. Marcus read the letter twice before the words fully sank in. Sarah, this can't be real. It's real, she said softly, her eyes bright with pride. Marcus, you've touched hundreds of lives over the past 6 months. Children who were afraid of dogs are now asking their parents for pets. Veterans who hadn't spoken about their trauma in years are opening up in Rex's presence. Nursing home residents who had withdrawn from life are laughing again when Rex visits. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but also by a deeper realization. A year ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, convinced I was worthless. Now the governor wants to give me an award. How does something like that happen? It happens, said a familiar voice behind them, when someone chooses love over fear. They turned to see Dr. Rodriguez approaching with David at his side. The younger Rodriguez had become Marcus's case manager and closest friend, helping him navigate the complexities of rebuilding a life while managing Rex's ongoing therapy needs. Dad's right, David added. You didn't just save Rex that night under the bridge. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you created something that's now saving other people." Rex, as if sensing that he was the subject of conversation, trotted over and sat at Marcus's feet, looking up at him with eyes that held no trace of the fear and pain that had once consumed them. The scars on his face had faded to thin white lines, and while the word "bad" was still faintly visible, it had become something different, not a mark of shame, but a testament to survival. "You know what I realized today?" Marcus said, scratching behind Rex's ears in the way that always made the dog's tail wag. "Emma would have loved this. She would have been so proud to see Rex helping other kids the way he's helped me." Sarah reached out and took Marcus's hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months of shared purpose and growing affection. "I think she's watching," she said simply. "I think they all are. Emma, Sarah, Officer Rodriguez. They're seeing the love they left behind multiplying and healing the world." As the sun began to set over Grant Park, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. Not the kind that comes from reaching an ending, but the kind that comes from understanding that every ending can become a new beginning if you're brave enough to let it. Rex stood up and stretched, then walked over to the children who were reluctantly preparing to leave with their parents. One by one, he said goodbye to each of them in his gentle way, accepting hugs and ear scratches with the patient dignity of a dog who had learned that love given freely always returns multiplied. "Ready to go home?" Sarah asked, gathering her things. Marcus looked around at the community center, at the families heading to their cars, at Rex contentedly accepting one last flower crown from Tommy Rodriguez. "Yeah," he said, feeling the word resonate with meaning it hadn't held in years. "Let's go home." As they walked toward Sarah's car, Rex trotting happily between them, Marcus thought about the governor's letter in his pocket and the ceremony that awaited them next month. But more than the recognition, he treasured this moment. Walking in the spring twilight with a woman who had become his partner in healing and a dog who had taught him that broken things could be made beautiful again. Some crossings, Marcus reflected, you don't know you've made them until you realize you're no longer the person who started the journey. 3 years, 8 months, and 21 days ago, he had been a man destroyed by loss, convinced that love was too dangerous to risk again. Tonight he was going home to an apartment filled with children's drawings, community service awards, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've been trusted with something precious and proven yourself worthy of that trust. Rex looked up at him as they reached the car, tail wagging, eyes bright with contentment and anticipation for whatever tomorrow might bring. In that look, Marcus saw everything he needed to know about second chances, about redemption, about the miraculous power of love to transform the darkest trauma into the brightest hope. They were home. Dear friends, Marcus Thompson's story reminds us of a profound truth that resonates deeply in our hearts. It's never too late for a second chance at happiness. At 58, sleeping under a Chicago bridge, Marcus had every reason to believe his story was over. He'd lost his wife, his daughter, his home, his purpose. Sound familiar? Many of us have faced moments when life felt impossibly broken, when we wondered if joy would ever find us again. But that frigid December night, when Marcus chose to share his last piece of bread with a wounded German shepherd named Rex, everything changed. Not because of grand gestures or miraculous interventions, but because of something beautifully simple: choosing love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. Marcus discovered that healing happens not when we're perfect, but when we're brave enough to care for something beyond ourselves. Rex didn't just find a home, he found his purpose as a therapy dog, proving that our deepest wounds can become our greatest gifts. Today, both Marcus and Rex wake up each morning knowing they matter, knowing they're loved, knowing their story isn't over. It's just beginning a beautiful new chapter. What moment in your life taught you that it's never too late for a fresh start? Have you ever found unexpected joy by helping someone or something else heal? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.